Ukraine waited for Russian commanders to celebrate, then blew up. The Russian airbase wars aren't always decided in open battles or massive offensives. Sometimes they turn on patience, on waiting for the exact moment when confidence replaces caution. That moment came on a quiet night in Crimea. Here's how it unfolded. Clock had just ticked past 3 in the morning on the Crimean Peninsula. It was September 21st, 2025. The air over the Black Sea was heavy, carrying the salt of the water and the cooling humidity of a late summer night that was finally beginning to yield to autumn. To the casual observer, or even the untrained sentry walking the perimeter of the covert Russian airbase, nestled deep within the occupied territory, the night was silent. But silence in this war is never empty. It is merely a container for signals, for electronic pulses, for the quiet hum of engines, and for the waiting eyes of an adversary that has learned to master the dark. At exactly 10 minutes past 3, the silence was broken by the rhythmic, heavy thumping of rotors. 2 dark shapes materialized from the northern sky, descending with the practiced aggression of machines that had spent too long in the kill zones of the Kherson front. These were not ordinary transport aircraft. They were Mi-8 AMTSH helicopters, the beasts the Russian military calls the Terminators. Each one of these flying fortresses was valued at roughly $16 million, a price tag that accounts for their advanced avionics, their armor plating, and the sheer lethality they can bring to a battlefield. But tonight, they were not hunting. They were fleeing, or rather, rotating. They had just completed a grueling flight of nearly 2 hours, ferrying more than 60 exhausted personnel and their heavy kits away from the meat grinder of the Northeast Kherson contact line. The pilots were tired. Their passengers were tired. The psychological weight of the front line, where Ukrainian drones hunt with the persistence of insects and the precision of snipers, was finally lifting as the wheels of the lead helicopter touched the concrete of the Crimean tarmac. This gate was supposed to be a sanctuary. It was treated as a rear area safe zone, a fortress layered with some of the most sophisticated air defense networks on the planet. The Russian commanders on the ground believed they were untouchable here. They believed that the distance from the front, combined with the technological shield they had erected, bought them the right to relax. They were wrong. The base was protected by a triad of defensive systems that on paper made it impenetrable. First, there was the Nebo-U. This is not just a radar. It is a 3-dimensional, very high-frequency surveillance giant, capable of detecting targets at massive ranges. It is designed specifically to counter stealth technology, using meter-wave physics to see things that other radars miss. It sat spinning, silently, sweeping the horizon for cruise missiles and high-altitude threats, its operators confident that nothing could approach without triggering a cascade of alarms. Below the Nebo-U's high-altitude gaze was the Podlet K1. This system is the predator of the low skies. It is a mobile, solid-state, 3-coordinate S-band radar built to detect small, low-flying targets, the very kind of drones and loitering munitions that Ukraine has weaponized with such devastating effect. The Podlet K1. The eyes for the surface-to-air missile batteries, specifically designed to close the gap that the Earth's curvature creates for long-range radars. It was spinning too, searching the clutter of the tree lines and the rooftops, looking for the telltale signature of an incoming attack. And then, the teeth of the defense, the Panzer S-1 interceptor batteries. These are the systems that Russia parades through Red Square, the hybrid gun missile trucks, that are supposed to be the final word in point defense. Armed with dual 30mm autocannons and 12 radio command-guided missiles, the Panzer is capable, theoretically, of shredding anything from a supersonic jet to a hovering quadcopter. The crews manning these systems tonight were relaxed. They had the Nebo U watching the horizon. They had the Podlet KO watching the treetops. They had the perceived safety of distance. As the two Mi-8s taxied off the main runway, they didn't head for the hardened bunkers. The pilots, eager to end their shift, and the ground crews, eager to process the arrival, drove them straight into the maintenance area. This was a routine servicing and refueling stop. The helicopters were parked close together, their rotors slowly winding down, the heat from their engines shimmering in the infrared spectrum, a beacon for anyone watching. And someone was watching. The tragedy of the Russian military in this phase of the war, late in 2025, was not a lack of equipment. It was a failure of imagination. They could not conceive that their enemy, the Ukrainians, had ceased to play by the rules of conventional engagement. Ukraine had stopped trying to match Russia hull for hull, or missile for missile. Instead, they had become masters of asymmetric dominance. They had turned the entire battle space into a trap where patience was the deadliest weapon. For weeks, Ukrainian military intelligence, the GUR, had been tracking the rotation schedules of the Russian aviation units in the southern sector. They knew the flight paths. They knew the fuel consumption rates. They knew that when these helicopters returned from a rotation, there was a window of vulnerability, a golden hour, where discipline slackened, where commanders congregated to debrief and, crucially, to celebrate the safe return of their assets. Inside the maintenance hangars, the mood was light. Russian commanders had gathered to meet the incoming crews. There were crates of supplies being unloaded and bottles were being opened. The arrival of the Terminators was a morale boost, a sign that the logistics chain was still holding, that the rotation system was functioning despite the relentless pressure of the Ukrainian offensive. High-ranking officers were present, men whose presence on a tarmac at 3 a.m. signaled the importance of the cargo and the personnel on board. They stood near the refueling trucks, near the open doors of the helicopters, confident in the electronic umbrella of the Panzers and the Nebos. But the umbrella had holes. Ukraine had not just been watching, they had been probing. In the weeks leading up to this night, they had systematically mapped the electronic emissions of the Crimean air defense network. They knew the blind spots of the Podlet K1. They knew the refresh rates of the Nebo U. They knew that the Panzer crews, plagued by fatigue and the monotony of false alarms, had begun to rely too heavily on the automated systems, and so, as the fuel hoses were connected to the thirsty tanks of the Mi-8s, a swarm of Ukrainian drones was already in the terminal phase of its flight. These were not the loud, slow-moving Shaheds that Russia used to terrorize civilians. These were the new generation of Ukrainian strike drones, low observable, composite body aircraft powered by electric motors that made them acoustically invisible until the final seconds. They hugged the terrain, flying barely 50 feet off the ground, slipping through the ravines and the valleys that the Podlet K1's radar beams skipped over. The plan was a masterclass in timing. The Ukrainians didn't want to hit the helicopters in the air, where they might crash and burn in a field. They wanted to hit them here, on the ground, surrounded by fuel trucks, maintenance equipment, and the command staff. They wanted maximum destruction. They wanted to send a message that no rear area was safe, that no amount of radar could protect against a force that understood the geography of the peninsula better than the occupiers did. At 3:25 a.m., the celebration was cut short. The first drone didn't strike a helicopter. It struck the Podlet K1 radar station situated on a rise overlooking the airfield. The warhead was small but precise, detonating directly into the phased array antenna. In an instant, the eyes of the low-altitude defense were gouged out. The Panzer crews inside their vehicles saw their screens go white with static, then black. Confusion reigned. Was it a malfunction? A cyber attack? Before they could reboot or switch to optical targeting, the second wave arrived. These drones dove out of the darkness with a terrifying screech, the sound of their aerodynamics failing as they pushed into a terminal dive. One drone slammed into the fuselage of the first Mi-8 AMTSH. The helicopter, laden with fuel and ammunition, disintegrated. The explosion was not a simple fireball. It was a volcanic eruption of aviation kerosene and high explosives. The shockwave flattened the maintenance crew standing nearby and shattered the glass of the control tower, hundreds of meters away. The second helicopter, parked just meters away, was caught in the blast radius. Its rotor blades, still warm and drooping from the flight, were snapped like twigs by the overpressure. But the Ukrainians were not leaving it to chance. A third drone, following seconds behind the first, drove itself directly into the cockpit of the second Mi-8. The detonation cracked the armored hull open, igniting the internal fuel tanks. The scene on the tarmac transformed instantly from a routine logistical operation into an inferno. The fuel trucks, parked dangerously close to facilitate quick turnaround, caught fire. One exploded, sending a geyser of burning liquid cascading over the maintenance bays and the assembled officers. The commanders who had been celebrating moments ago were now scrambling for cover that didn't exist, engulfed in a chaotic storm of shrapnel and heat. The Panzer S-1 battery, now blind and operating in a panic, began firing its autocannons wildly into the night sky, tracing lines of tracer fire against the stars. But there was nothing to shoot. The drones had already done their work. The attackers were not loitering. They were munitions. They were gone. The defense system was fighting a ghost, expending ammunition against the empty air, while the real damage burned furiously on the ground behind it. This strike on September 21st, 2025, was not just a loss of hardware. It was a strategic catastrophe for the Russian Southern Command. The two Mi-8 AMTSH helicopters represented $32 million of lost aviation assets, but their value to the war effort was incalculable. These were the workhorses of the special forces, the extractors of the wounded, the deployers of the elite assault teams. To lose two in a single night, along with their specialized crews and the command staff on the ground, was a blow that would ripple through the entire Kherson front. But the destruction of the helicopters was only half the story. The loss of the Nebo-U and the Podlet K1 radars was, in many ways, far more damaging. These systems take months, if not years, to manufacture. They rely on high-tech components that sanctions have made difficult for Russia to source. By blinding the airbase, Ukraine had effectively opened a corridor for future attacks. They had peeled back the roof of the fortress, exposing everything inside to the next wave of strikes. The aftermath of the attack revealed the extent of Ukraine's dominance in the intelligence war. Verified reports from the ground indicated that the strike occurred exactly 17 minutes after the lead helicopter touched down. This implies a level of real-time surveillance that is terrifying for a defending army. It means that Ukraine had eyes on the base, whether through satellite imagery, local partisans on the ground, or high-altitude reconnaissance drones, and the command and control capability to authorize and execute a precision strike in a window of less than 20 minutes. This is the definition of dominance. It is not about having more tanks or more planes. It is about the ability to observe, decide, and act faster than the enemy can react. Russia, for all its mass and its entrenched positions, was fighting a reactive war. They were moving pieces around the board, trying to plug gaps, while Ukraine was changing the shape of the board itself. The psychological impact on the Russian forces in Crimea cannot be overstated. The Tomchina was a hub, a place where soldiers rotated through to feel safe, to remember what it was like not to be under fire. By turning it into a kill zone, Ukraine destroyed the concept of safety for the Russian soldier. There is no rear area anymore. There is only the front and the waiting. In the days following the attack, Russian military, bloggers, and state media attempted to downplay the incident, claiming that falling debris had caused a minor fire. But the satellite imagery that emerged told a different story. The scorch marks on the tarmac where the two helicopters had stood were black scars visible from space. The wreckage of the radar installations was scattered across the hillsides. The verified obituary notices for high-ranking officers and specialized pilots began to appear on social media, confirming the human cost of the celebration that never finished. This event serves as a microcosm for the state of the war in late 2025. Russia continues to rely on massed artillery, massed infantry attacks, and heavy, expensive platforms like the Mi-8 and the Panzer. They operate on a doctrine of overwhelming force. Ukraine, conversely, operates on a doctrine of overwhelming precision. They trade in information. They trade in timing. They use a $10,000 drone to destroy a $16 million helicopter. They use a single well-placed missile to blind a $100 million radar network. The economic disparity of this exchange is unsustainable for Moscow. Every time a Panzer fails to intercept a cheap drone, the cost of the war tilts further against Russia. Every time a Nebo-U is destroyed, a hole opens up in the air defense network that cannot easily be filled. Ukraine understands this. They are fighting a war of attrition, but not the kind of attrition that was fought in the trenches of the 20th century. This is systems attrition. They are systematically dismantling the complex, expensive, and hard-to-replace nervous system of the Russian military machine. The dominance of Ukraine is also evident in their adaptability. The strike on the Crimean base required the integration of multiple domains of warfare. It required cyber warfare to monitor Russian communications and know when the helicopters were arriving. It required electronic warfare to jam or spoof the local sensors. It required the engineering prowess to build drones capable of bypassing the Podlet K-1. And it required the tactical discipline to wait, to let the helicopters land, to let the pilots get out, to let the commanders drive up, to wait for the moment of maximum vulnerability. That patience is the hallmark of a professional, mature military force. An undisciplined force would have fired as soon as the helicopters appeared on radar. They might have missed or caused minor damage. But the Ukrainian command waited. They understood that the target was not just the metal of the helicopters, but the morale of the enemy. As the sun rose over Crimea on the morning of September 21st, the smoke was still rising from the airfield. The Russian emergency services were picking through the wreckage, trying to identify the remains of the specialized equipment and the personnel. The air defense network in the sector was offline, leaving a gaping hole in the coverage of the peninsula. And somewhere, in a command bunker hundreds of kilometers away, Ukrainian operators were already analyzing the data from the strike, looking for the next target, the next weakness, the next opportunity to demonstrate that they, not the occupiers, were the masters of the night. The strategic implications of this specific raid extended far beyond the immediate loss of 2 helicopters. It forced the Russian command to pull their aviation assets even further back, away from the effective range of Ukrainian drones. This, in turn, reduced the sortie rate of the Russian Air Force over the front lines in Kherson and Zaporizhia. Helicopters that have to fly an extra 100 kilometers to reach the fight are helicopters that spend less time supporting the infantry, burn more fuel, and require more maintenance. By striking deep, Ukraine was effectively thinning the air support for Russian troops on the zero line. Furthermore, the destruction of the Nebo-U radar blinded the Russians to high-altitude threats in that sector. This allowed the Ukrainian Air Force to operate more freely, launching Storm Shadow and Scalp cruise missiles with a higher probability of penetration. The domino effect of a single, well-executed special operation can be catastrophic for an integrated air defense system. When one node fails, the stress on the others increases. The operators of the remaining Pantsers and S-400 batteries become jumpy, prone to shooting at friendly aircraft or phantom targets, further degrading their combat effectiveness. We must also consider the technological evolution that this strike represents. The ability of Ukrainian drones to bypass the Podlet K-1, a radar specifically designed to stop them, suggests a leap in electronic warfare capabilities or airframe design. It implies that Ukraine has analyzed the waveforms and detection algorithms of the Russian radars and found a way to ghost them. This is an intelligence victory of the highest order. It means that Russian defense contractors now have to go back to the drawing board, while their soldiers on the front lines look up at the sky with increasing paranoia. The narrative of the war in 2025 has been defined by these moments. While the front lines on the map may shift slowly, the degradation of Russian capability is accelerating. The meat assaults of the Russian infantry may gain meters of ground, but the systematic destruction of their high-tech rear guard by Ukraine is losing them the war of the future. A modern army cannot function without secure logistics, without safe airfields, and without reliable eyes in the sky. Ukraine is systematically removing these pillars, one by one. The strike on the Crimean airbase was a microcosm of this broader reality. It showed a Russian force that is heavy, slow, and arrogant, reliant on past glories and paper specifications. And it showed a Ukrainian force that is agile, innovative, and ruthless, a force that learns from every engagement and adapts faster than its opponent can think. The 2 Mi-8 AMTH helicopters, now just twisted metal on a scorched tarmac, are symbols of this arrogance. They were brought down not by a matching fleet of Russian helicopters, but by the ingenuity of a nation fighting for its survival. The commanders who died celebrating their arrival were victims of their own complacency, a complacency bred by a belief in Russian superiority that no longer exists in reality. As we analyze the verified data from this event, the conclusion is inescapable. Ukraine is not just holding the line, they are dictating the terms of the engagement. They are choosing where battles happen. They are choosing when they happen. And, increasingly, they are choosing how they end. The night of September 21st was a dark one for the Russian military, but it was a shining example of the dominance that Ukraine has achieved in the art of modern war. The base remains a ruin, the radars are silent. and the sky over Crimea belongs more and more to the silent watchers of the Ukrainian intelligence services. Let us delve deeper into the specific machinery involved to truly understand the scale of this defeat. The Mi-8 AMT is not a relic of the Cold War, although its lineage dates back to the Soviet era. This modern variant is equipped with the Sturm V missile system, Igla V air-to-air missiles, and a Sturm V anti-tank guided missile system. It has night vision capability, advanced navigation suites, and armor that can withstand small arms fire. It is designed to operate in the most hostile environments imaginable. The fact that 2 of them were destroyed on the ground without firing a shot renders all that technology meaningless. It highlights the fundamental truth of this conflict. Technology without security is just expensive scrap metal. The Nebo-U radar, similarly, is a marvel of engineering. It stands nearly as tall as a 3-story building when fully deployed. Its antenna array is massive, designed to pick up the faintest reflections of electromagnetic energy. It is a strategic asset, one that Russia cannot easily replace, given the sanctions on high-end semiconductors. The loss of a Nebo-U is not like losing a tank. You can build a tank in a month. A radar of this complexity takes a year or more to calibrate and integrate. When Ukraine destroys one, they are creating a gap in the Russian shield that will last for the duration of the war. And then there is the human element. The pilots of these helicopters are not conscripts. They are officers, highly trained professionals with hundreds of flight hours. They are the elite. Training a replacement pilot takes years and costs millions. When those pilots were killed in the maintenance bay, that experience died with them. The institutional memory of the Russian aviation regiments is being bled dry, strike by strike. The wait was the key. We must return to that thought, the discipline to wait. In the high-stakes environment of special operations, the urge to strike at the first sign of a target is overwhelming. The adrenaline is pumping. The window of opportunity feels like it is closing every second. But the Ukrainian operators held their fire. They watched the helicopters land. They watched the rotors stop. They watched the fuel trucks roll up. They waited for the target to become richest. They maximized the return on investment for their drones. This is the cold, hard calculus of a dominant military force. It is the calculation of a winner. This event also exposes the hollowness of the Russian layered defense doctrine. The theory is that overlapping fields of fire and detection, long range, medium range, short range, create an impenetrable dome. But a dome is only as strong as the communication between its parts. On that night in September, the communication failed. The Nebo-U was looking too high. The Podlet K-1 was looking. But perhaps it was jammed. Or perhaps the drones were simply too small and flew too low, masking themselves in the ground clutter. The Panzer relied on data that wasn't there. The layers didn't overlap. They collapsed. Ukraine has found the seams in the Russian armor. They have poked and prodded until they found the soft tissue underneath. And now, they are exploiting it with ruthless efficiency. The verified destruction of these assets in Crimea is a signal to every Russian commander in the occupied territories. You are being watched. You are being timed. And your celebration is the trigger for your destruction. The war in Ukraine has rewritten the textbooks of military strategy. It has shown that a smaller, more agile force, leveraging technology and intelligence, can dismantle a larger, more ponderous adversary. The strike on the Crimean airbase will be studied in military academies for decades as a perfect example of a deep strike interdiction operation. It demonstrates the fusion of cyber, signals, intelligence, and kinetic action into a single, decisive blow. As the war moves towards the winter of 2025, the dynamic is clear. Russia is digging in, hoping to freeze the conflict, hoping that their mass will eventually suffocate the Ukrainian resistance. But Ukraine is not suffocating. They are evolving. They are striking deeper, harder, and with greater precision than ever before. The destruction of the Mi-8s was not an anomaly. It was a statement of intent. The message is simple. There is no sanctuary. There is no safe harbor. As long as the occupation continues, the sky will rain fire on the occupier. The dominance of Ukraine is not just in the physical destruction of enemy assets, but in the control of the narrative. By conducting these strikes with such precision, they humiliate the Russian military leadership. They show the world that the Second Army of the world cannot even protect its own rear bases. They show the Russian public that their government's promises of security are lies. This psychological dominance is just as important as the military one. It erodes the will of the enemy to fight. It sows discord and distrust in the ranks. The story of the 2 Mi-8 helicopters in Crimea is the story of the entire war. It is the story of a giant that has been blinded and hamstrung by a faster, smarter opponent. It is the story of technological hubris meeting tactical brilliance. And it is the story of a Ukraine that has proven, time and again, that it is the dominant force on the battlefield of the 21st century. The wreckage on the tarmac is cleared away, but the fear remains. The lesson has been taught, and the drones are still out there, waiting in the dark for the next celebration to begin. The strategic paralysis this induces in the Russian command cannot be ignored. Following the September 21st event, verified reports indicated a cessation of nighttime rotary wing flights in the Crimean sector of nearly 72 hours. That is 3 full days, where Russian ground troops in the south had no rapid medevac capabilities, no rapid resupply, and no close air support on standby. 3 days where the Ukrainian ground forces could push their advantage, knowing the sky was clear of enemy gunships. This is how a tactical strike achieves operational level effects. You kill 2 helicopters, but you ground 100. You destroy a radar, and you ground the jets that rely on it. The multiplier effect of these precision strikes is what allows Ukraine to maintain the initiative, despite being outnumbered in raw manpower. Moreover, the financial asymmetry continues to widen. The replacement cost of the equipment lost that night – helicopters, radars, support vehicles, specialized fuel trucks – approaches $100 million when you factor in the logistics of replacement and the training of new crews. The cost to Ukraine for the operation? Likely less than $200,000 in drones and operational costs. An exchange ratio of 500 to 1. No economy, not even one on a war footing, can sustain that kind of bleeding indefinitely. Ukraine is bankrupting the Russian military machine, one airfield at a time. We must also look at the specific verified details of the Nebo-U destruction. This radar is the backbone of the S-400 system's long-range capability. Without it, the S-400 batteries are forced to use their own organic engagement radars for searching, which exposes them to anti-radiation missiles like the US supplied HARM. By taking out the eyes, the Nebo-U, Ukraine forces the S-400 to turn on its own flashlight in a dark room, making it an easy target. it is a trap. Ukraine destroys the surveillance radar to bait the engagement radar, then destroys the engagement radar to open the sky for their jets. It is a methodical, step-by-step dismantling of the enemy's air defense network, and the strike on September 21st was a textbook execution of the first step. The Podlet K1 failure is equally significant. This radar was specifically marketed by Russia as the answer to modern drone warfare. It was supposed to be the shield that caught the small, low-flying threats. Its failure to detect the incoming strike force suggests that Ukrainian engineers have found a flaw in its Doppler processing or its vertical scanning capabilities. If the Podlet K1 cannot see Ukrainian drones, then Russia has no reliable low-altitude eyes. The implications of this are terrifying for Russian planners. It means their critical infrastructure, bridges, depots, command centers, is effectively naked against low-level drone attacks. The narrative of Ukrainian dominance is built on these technical realities. It is not propaganda, it is physics and electronics. If your radar cannot see the threat, you are not dominant, no matter how many missiles you have in the tube. If your helicopters cannot land to refuel without exploding, you do not control the air. Ukraine has seized the initiative by mastering the technical dimensions of the war. They are winning the engineering war, the coding war, and the frequency war. As we look back at the events of September 2025, the picture is clear. The Russian military is a beast in a cage, lashing out with power but without vision. Ukraine is the matador, precise, calculated, and always one step ahead. The celebration that ended in fire was a final, grim irony. The Russian commanders were toasting to their safety in the one place on Earth where they were most in danger. The crosshairs of a Ukrainian drone operator who had been watching, waiting, and calculating the perfect moment to strike. And when that moment came, the dominance of Ukraine was absolute. If you want more deep, real-world breakdowns of how this war is being fought behind the headlines, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story.